Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 102 of USMB Lead Pods. My name is Matt Erzman, and as always, really grateful to have you with me for another episode. So today we're tackling a different topic that we haven't addressed before, kind of a different route for us, but a fun one. Today I'm talking to author Elaine McAllister. Elaine is a very accomplished author. She's written 7 books. She covers several different topics and themes in her writing, but today we're going to talk about what is probably what she's most passionate about, and that's generational storytelling. She is a big advocate for keeping a family genealogy and passing down family stories. As she points out, there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from history. Everyone has a story worth telling. And it's a good reminder that we should all remember that, especially for those of us who still have parents, grandparents, or older relatives still living. We can learn so much from them and their stories, of course, that I'm sure they would love to share with us. She did a great job addressing things like, what do we do if we uncover some family history that maybe we're not so proud of? How do we know which family heirlooms are worth keeping and which things are maybe things we can get rid of? And I even like how she has the idea of curating a home of memories. She's got some cool examples of that. So I learned a lot from Elaine. She's got some really cool stories and examples to share, and I'm excited to share this episode with you. So let's take a quick break to hear from a sponsor, and then we'll get to my conversation with author Elaine McAllister.
USMB is pleased to offer 2 free newsletters to our Mennonite Brethren family. Snapshot comes from the desk of USMB National Director Don Morris and contains news and prayer requests. And C-Link is informative with news pertaining to Mennonite Brethren ministries and inter-Mennonite agencies. Sign up for one or both of USMB's free newsletters today at www.usmb.org/newsletters and stay in the know on all the latest news and prayer requests.
All right, friends. Well, today I'm excited to introduce you to a new friend. Today I'm speaking with Elaine McAllister. She's a very accomplished author. She's written for all kinds of different publications. She's got 6 books that are already published, and the 7th is on the way. And we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's just go ahead and dive in. Elaine, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to have a conversation with you. So you mentioned that you've got to meet some MB folks in Hillsboro, where you currently live. For people who haven't met you yet, let's just get to know you a little bit. Tell us about you, Elaine.
Okay. Well, I'm a transplanted Iowan living in Kansas. I've lived in Kansas now longer than I've lived in Iowa, so I guess I'm a Kansan. Married with 2 grown children and 5 grandchildren from 7 months to 17 years, and a few bonus grands in there too, but retired from church office administrator position in the evangelical church in McPherson, and happily writing now in my second career. And I told the Lord that if he opened doors for me to write, which is the desire of my heart, always has been, then if he opened doors, I'd walk through them. And he hasn't closed. Well, he's closed some doors and he's opened a lot of other ones. So I've been walking through those doors ever since. Keeps me busy.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, publishing 6 books is no small feat. That's quite the accomplishment. So tell us about your books. What are some of the ones that you've written? And maybe what's the most recent one that you just finished?
The most recent one that I just finished is called All Aboard, and it has a picture in the cover will capture, hopefully, some readers. It has a picture of a early 1900s passenger train with a lone passenger getting ready to get on board, and it's not my grandmother, but it tells the story of my grandmother. The subtitle of the book is The Adventures of Miss Ratcliffe, and she was a pioneer school teacher, a Quaker school teacher in north central Kansas, who took off a year from teaching school and got on a train and headed to California and back by herself at 25 years old, single Quaker maiden. And she kept a diary during that time, and just little notes, not a major diary, but just little notes of what she did this day and that day. And she visited family on the way out there and stayed with cousins and aunts and uncles. And so I took I transcribed her journal, and then I added some family history to it and some historical items from her journey, from places she visited and things she saw. And I kind of translated some of the things that she might have mentioned that would not make sense to my grandchildren. I wanted to make it user-friendly for them to be able to read it and know more about this was my great, 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 whatever. So anyway, it's just the story of her journey in 1913, 1914 from Kansas to California and back on a train. It was a fun ride. Very cool. Awesome. And we were just chatting before we started recording here, and you've kind of covered a lot of different topics, a lot of ground in your various writings, but they all kind of have a theme, right? You've kind of got this theme of writing your story, telling your story, but maybe more importantly, going back in history, knowing your family's history, knowing your genealogy. Can you just fill us in? Is that right? Is that kind of true? Is that kind of the basics? That's pretty accurate, yes. I have always been one who loved to write, and I've always been interested in other people's stories. I firmly believe everyone has a story to tell. A lot of people don't think their story is worth telling or has any value, and other people know they have a story inside, but maybe they don't know how to write it. Well, as a writer, I love to connect with those people and help them fulfill that, help them learn to tell that story. And so that's kind of my heart. And when I developed from that passion, I developed this generational storytelling workshop that I have led a couple times in various different area libraries, small libraries around here in central Kansas. And it's a 5-week course, and it covers everything from meet your ancestors, encouraging them to go back and see who they know a little bit about and who they know maybe a lot about. Some of us are inundated when our parents or grandparents die and we get boxes of their stuff and we don't know what to do with it. And it can be overwhelming, especially if you have the desire to do something good with that information. Documents maybe, or stories that are half written, pictures and things like that, So anyway, I teach how to know what to preserve and how to preserve it, because there's a lot of preservation that comes into it too. I've taught classes a couple times for the Topeka Genealogical Society for their annual conference. And that's what led to me developing this 5-week workshop. And it combines genealogy and writing with family history, I guess. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And I'm excited we're going to dive into this, because I think it's a really good and worthwhile thing to dive into. Do you know, can you pinpoint why did this become so important to you? Why is this something that you've really devoted so much of your life to? Well, I think family for sure is important to me, and faith is important to me. And the idea of passing on our faith to our children and our children's children, that's important to me. Grandparenting, when I became a grandmother, that just opened up a whole new life for me. Mm-hmm. And so I have delved into that with gusto, I guess you might say. And I want my faith to be visible to my grandchildren and my descendants, but I also want the stories to be documented and continued. They say that if you don't pass on family stories, they're gone within 3 generations. Mm. So when you take that personally and you realize, if I don't pass on this generational story, 3 generations from now, they're not going to know a thing about it. And so I take that seriously and try to do my best. And that's where the passion to teach others too, that's where that comes from. There's a study that was done by a couple of colleagues at Emory University about the influence and the impact of knowing one's family history on children. And they did this study, I teach on it in my class. They did this study several years ago, but they have, through their study, they have proven that the children who know something about their family history, or even names and stories, they are more resilient and more able to deal with life than the kids that don't. They did this study, they did the study before, but then they kind of used the children of 9/11 to kind of prove their point. And anyway, their study is really interesting, and it kind of caught my eye. Yeah.
You shared some of that with me in a previous email. I was shocked that a lot of people, I think a majority of Americans can't list all four of their grandparents, right?
Right. And that's one of the things I come out with when I start my generational storytelling. I ask the people that are there kind of as an icebreaker, can you name your four grandparents, first, middle, and last name of your four grandparents? 47% of Americans can do that. But if you ask them to name their 8 biological great-grandparents, only 4% of Americans can do that. And that blows my mind.
Yeah. Because in the scheme of history, that wasn't that long ago, right? Our great-grandparents were not that long ago.
Yeah.
So for people listening, can you help us explain, what I'm fully on board with this, but just I want to hear you explain, why is this so important for us to know the stories of our great-grandparents? I agree with you, but can you help us to explain why is that so important?
I believe it is because we tend to, if we don't learn from history in general or from the mistakes even made within our own families, then we will repeat those. And if we do learn of the strengths of our families past, then it gives us something to build on. And we think, well, if Grandpa Merle could overcome this, then I surely can. I've got the same genetics,
Yeah.
So I think it's both positive and negative. It helps us to be strong, and it helps us to avoid maybe downfalls that they had.
Yeah, totally agree. You mentioned that obviously your faith is really important to you too. And I don't know, I think there's obviously a lot of family history in the Bible, right? And there's sections, a significant section of books that are devoted to genealogies.
Right.
Why is that important? We often just kind of read past those really quickly, but those are important, right? It's important for us to know where these people came from. Is that part of it too?
Well, I think so. And I think that's just kind of something I grew up with. And then on the faith side and the biblical side, but then also on the family side, because I also grew up, my mother was fascinated by family history but also a knowledgeable Bible scholar, I would say. She was my walking, what did I call her? My walking commentary for the family. If we had a question, we could ask her and she knew it. And so that's a legacy I have always respected in her. And I kind of, if I could be like her in any way, that would be one of the ways I would like to be like her.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I totally agree that it's important for us to learn from our past. It's good for us to know what, like you said, what's in our DNA, what challenges have our ancestors overcome, what amazing things have they accomplished. I think it's really good for us to all know that. So we probably have a pretty wide range of ages of people listening. So whatever age of life the listener is right now, what advice do you have if they don't have this, if this hasn't been an important part of their family to document these kinds of things? Where should we start? What's a good place to start with this?
Well, good question. Most of us have access to elders, be they aunts, uncles, or grandparents, or parents still. I don't. But ask questions while they're alive. Take advantage of the time that you have with your elders to ask those questions. You're going to wish you had if you didn't.
Yeah. If
you don't. And then if you're among the elders, like I am now, a grandmother, and most of, I was one that received those boxes of treasures. And my parents moved several times in my lifetime, in my childhood, and everywhere they moved, there was at least one box, and usually two, that she carried with her on every move, and it was labeled sentimental trash. She didn't ever open it. It was just sentimental trash. So do not throw this away, but this is sentimental trash, and I have to have this box. And so I inherited from her documents and pictures and things like that. And so instead of keeping them in a box called sentimental trash, I tend to want to be one that enjoys them and shares them day in and day out with my kids and my grandkids. So that's another little segment of my workshop, is how to be the curator of your own home. So many people have treasures, maybe they're treasures, but they don't either realize it or they don't do anything with them. My own grandmother, the one who went across country when she was a single lady, she, with her first school teacher paychecks, she bought a watch that was kind of a brooch, kind of like a pocket watch, but it hung by a pin on her chest. And whenever she dressed up throughout her whole life, that pin was on her chest. It had her initials on one side, and it had a watch on the other side, and she could just swivel it. Well, I remember that as a child. Every time I sat on her lap, I would lean in and I could hear the tick-tock of the watch. And I just loved that little gold watch. Well, my oldest cousin inherited that when our grandmother died. And I'm a keeper of sentimental things and a recorder of such. So I contacted my cousin one time. She lives in Des Moines. And I contacted her and I said, hey, I'm going to be up there. And I really would like to get a very clear picture of Grandma's watch. Could you bring that? I didn't have the heirloom itself, but I wanted a crisp picture of it because I was going to put it in my heritage album and describe it and talk about it and tell the story. So she met me at my aunt's house and she brought that watch with her, and it was in a little gift box with tissue paper wrapped around it. And we opened it up and I was getting ready to take a picture outside where I had good lighting, and I put it on a black background. And she said, I'll tell you what, she said, I just want you to take that home with you. She said, it's been sitting in my underwear drawer for the last 30 years. I was in tears. Let me tell you, it does not sit in the underwear drawer at my house. I put it in a little jeweled frame, and I pinned it onto a piece of black velvet, and it's in this jeweled frame, and it's in my living room, and I see it every day. And so that's what I mean by, people are different. Some people enjoy such things. Some people stash them in a dresser drawer. But I'm all about maybe I should say honoring your elders and those things that were special to them. And so my house is a curated home full of such memories.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. And that leads me to, this is probably a silly question and maybe impossible to answer, but for the grandparent side and the child side, how do you decide what to keep and what to share? Because I think a lot of people are probably on either end of the spectrum or somewhere in the middle, of course. Maybe they keep everything and there's maybe too much stuff that it's impossible to even know what's important, right? There's that end of things. Or there might be some people who just don't keep anything and they get rid of everything. Most of us are probably somewhere in the middle, but on either side, if you're a grandparent, how do you decide what to keep and what to pass on? And if you're a child, how do you know how to sort through this? Do you know what I mean? Practically, how do you weigh that? Because that's a hard call on both ends, I think.
It is hard. It is very hard. And I think it's a daily struggle for a lot of us, especially those of us in retirement age. And also for the younger ones, we are living in what I call a disposable society right now. For example, if I had a whole set of some fancy china and silverware, chances are nobody in my family would want that. And so you see those things at antique stores and flea markets going for nothing when they were a treasured piece of family history to some.
Right.
The same with photographs. When I go into an antique store and I see, when I see somebody's family photographs in an antique store, it just breaks my heart. And I want to look at the back and find out the family and find a descendant and send it on. And, but again, not everyone cares about things like that. Usually within every family, there is someone who has the tendency to be the family historian, such as, I am within our family. So,
well, along with objects, I want to get to the generational storytelling part of it too, because I think it's kind of a similar thing that we wrestle with storytelling, right? Because I think it's really, like we've talked about, it's really important for us to learn lessons from our ancestors. And I imagine if you're sitting down to write your life story that you want to pass on, you might struggle a little bit with, oh man, do I include this really hard story, this really messy season, this mistake I made?
Right.
It's maybe it's embarrassing. Maybe you don't want your kids to know some of your history, but it's also important to learn from it, right? So if someone's in the situation where they're deciding what stories to tell, what stories to keep, that's a hard thing too, right? How do you balance that?
It is. Let me give you an example. And I tend to look for opportunities to share with my grandchildren at whatever place they are at in life or whatever is on their plate, whatever they're struggling with right now. And this is just one example. Two of my grandchildren are from a divorced home. Both of our two grown children have had a previous marriage.
Okay.
And so therefore, that's why I have the bonus grandchildren.
Okay.
But so when my youngest granddaughter was, about 6 or so, maybe a little older, her parents divorced, my son and my daughter-in-law. And she was struggling a little bit with it, not a lot, but a little bit. And it dawned on me one day that sometimes we do learn from the good and the bad of those who came before us. So I told her one day, I reminded her of her great-grandmother who lives locally in Kansas. And I said, you know her, don't you? And she says, yeah. And I said, and you know the great-grandfather who lived in another state? She says, yeah, I remember him. And I said, did you know that they were once married? She had not put that into her mind at all, because it was two separate people in two separate states that didn't seem to know each other.
Yeah.
I said, they were once married and they had a little boy and a little girl. And I said, do you know who that little boy was? And she said, no. And I said, that was your grandpa, my husband, Jim.
Okay.
And so she got from that conversation, so they got a divorce. We still love her and we still love him, and they're in different states. But my grandpa was a kid when they got a divorce, and my husband was about the same age she was. Mm-hmm. So then another time later, I just kind of said that in passing. And then another time later, she was over at the house, and I showed her a picture. And this was a picture from pre-divorce days where my father-in-law was holding my husband as a toddler, and my mother-in-law was holding an infant baby and his sister. And I showed her that picture. I said, do you know who that is? And she didn't. And so I explained it. And so from that little snippet of life, she learned that, hey, my grandpa survived. He grew up. He's a loving man. He loves his dad and he loves his mom. And I can grow up too, and I can be loving and I can be a loved person, even though my parents are separate. And so it's a huge lesson in family history that touched her 6-year-old heart. I think helped her get through that time. So that's one example of, when I teach my class, I tell people to include the good, the bad, and the ugly when they write, because there are ways we can reach others through the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. That's a great example. You've mentioned your class a few times. So can you explain more about that? I know. So I think some of this is learning how to just tell stories verbally when we're together, right? I think that's an important part of passing down family history. But I know another part is actually writing it. So can you tell us about that? How do we go about writing our story? What tips do you have to start that process?
Well, when I teach my class, I have 5 sections, and the first one is all about unpacking your ancestors. And in that, I delve a little bit into, and that kind of answers the question that you just mentioned. How do we know where to start? Whose stories do we tell? So I give them a cheat sheet, if you will, just a ancestor, I don't know what to call it, just a sheet. And they are to pick 5 different ancestors just off the top of their head. It can be even a parent and maybe 2 grandparents and maybe a great-grandparent that they heard stories about, people that they know of and they would love to know more about their stories. And then I have them go through the process of digging into that person and finding out what do I know about that person already, character traits, occupation, marriage, where did they live? Did they migrate across country? Did they have family? Did they have siblings? those kinds of things. So I want them on this chart to record everything they know about that person. And then I want them to do this 5 times. That's kind of their homework. And through the process of doing that, Meet the Ancestors is the first of my 5 weeks sessions. And through the process of doing that, they narrow it down to the one that they know the most about is usually a good one to start with in the writing process. And then my second week, I talk about, so you think you can't write, hogwash. And so it's more about writing, because a lot of people that come into this think, I don't have a clue how to write. I'm not a writer. I can't put 2 words together and make sense. And I give them just the basics of what it is to write a good story. It doesn't have to be a Pulitzer Prize winner or whatever. You have to be on the bestseller list to be able to write a family story. And I also teach them through the process of these 5 weeks, I teach them that you can do something as simple as an ancestor profile, which is just the names, dates, marriage dates, date of birth, date of death, and then maybe siblings, maybe parents, and maybe just a paragraph about each one. That's a good starting place. When I did my family heritage albums, that's what I started with. Anybody that I traced my ancestry back, and anybody that I knew anything about, I would write a paragraph or a page of whatever that was. And then as I add more information, as I get more information, I can change that. I can expand upon that and make it more of a narrative and less of a paragraph. So there's always room for expansion. That's another thing with family histories. You're never done. It's a big job, but it's a rewarding job too. And then my third week, I teach about research, and I have compiled over the last couple decades quite my own resource list of books and just resources that are available to people. I have a lot of books in my own library, but there are a lot more that are available. And then the fourth week, I talk about being the curator of your own home. And I mentioned that a bit earlier. And then the fifth week, I just wrap it all up and I give them some more information on organizational things, how to organize. Like I have a file of my ancestors by surname. And every time I get an additional piece of information on any of them, it goes in that file. And then when I have time, I take that file out and I expand that story.
Yeah.
So, does that give you an overview enough?
Yeah, that's very cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think it's just interesting, right? Like it's just fun to know where you come from. I think that we can learn so much. I think it's awesome. I think it's a very cool project. So one question I have as I begin to think a little bit deeper about this, I heard a story recently. I can't remember the name of it, but there's some kind of news show. Maybe you're familiar with it. There's a TV show where they take celebrities or famous figures and they do a DNA test and they go as far back as they can and they find out where they came from, and they usually undig some really interesting stories. Do you know what I'm talking about? I can't remember the name.
I don't. I've never watched it because I don't have what cable it's on, but I know what you're talking about.
Okay. And I'm forgetting who I heard an interview with, but I heard some kind of celebrity or famous figure said they purposely didn't want to go on that show because they were afraid of what they were going to find out. Right. Some of us, if we're honest, if we look back through history, odds are some of our ancestors probably had slaves and they probably did some bad things. Right. So how do you reckon with that on this side of history? We want to know our history. We can learn a lot, but there's also, it might bring up some painful things, right? How do you hold both of those things?
My brother is a genetic genealogist just in his retirement. He's a retired Air Force. And he has always loved genealogy too. He's more into the data and the gathering facts. I'm more into the who was this person. I want to tell his story. We make a good team together. And when he teaches on genetic genealogy and maybe doing a DNA test, because they're so popular these days and so many people have done that, he always warns people, and I warn them in my 5-week class, that those are good things to do, but you need to be prepared for what you might find out that you don't know. You need to be prepared for the skeletons, because it's not a matter of will I find them, but I will find them.
Yeah.
as long as you go into that, knowing that, it's, I think, okay. But again, that troubles some people more than others.
I think part of it is we can learn from it, right? Like
That's true.
we're not saying that our ancestors were perfect saints, just like we're not, right? There's going to be things that our great grandchildren find out about us that probably aren't shining examples. We can learn from.
And that kind of goes back to the divorce thing. You know, a lot of people, don't like that there's a divorce in their family. That's becoming more and more not popular. That's not the right word, but you know what I mean?
Common. Yeah.
More common. Yes. And some people it's one of the good, bad, and the ugly. It's the ugly part of it. And that's true, but we can learn from that just the same as we can learn from the good stories.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. Well, our time's going fast here. We can still cover a lot of ground here, Elaine. But one thing I want to at least make sure we devote a little bit of time to. I know being an intentional grandparent is something that you're also really passionate about, and that overlaps a little bit here. So if we have some grandparents listening, maybe they have an interest in family history, maybe they haven't really done this work yet. What advice do you have, and how does genealogy come into play as it relates to being an intentional grandparent?
Well, again, I think it has to do with passing down your stories. And for me and for people of faith, it's passing down your faith story. I hope that my grandchildren see in me, as well as hear from me, the wonderful things God has done for me and the faithfulness throughout the good and the bad in my life. So that's just very important to me. Being an intentional grandparent, I first learned about this organization. It's called Legacy Coalition, and it's an intentional Christian grandparenting organization started by Larry Fowler, who used to be on staff with Awana's ministry.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And he is the founder of Legacy Coalition. It started out under the umbrella of Awana's, and then it went separate about 3 years into it. And it's a growing, thriving ministry for grandparents across the nation and actually around the world. I partner with him in that. Well, he endorsed my very first book, which is Celebrate Grandparenting. And then he also carries that book. The organization carries that book on their website, and at all of their conferences and seminars, they have my book on theirs, on theirs, available to their people, I should say. That outreach is just a huge resource for grandparents. And so I would encourage grandparents to check out Legacy Coalition for sure. And then there's another organization. It's called Grandkids Matter, or the National Association for Grandparenting. That too is a good resource for grandparents that want to be more intentional in impacting the lives of their grandchildren.
Awesome. Very cool. I also want to spend a minute talking to younger people. So I guess I'll put myself in that category for now. So my grandpa recently got really interested in family history and genealogy, and he's doing a lot of research, and he's actually doing something really cool. He's using a voice recorder to record a lot of things for me, which I'm really grateful for. I think I'm really grateful for it.
Yes.
And I also want to be honest that I think a lot of younger people, again, just being honest, we feel so busy. We feel like job and family and culture just moves so fast. Yeah. I think if we're honest, I think a lot of us really value our family history. Like if you ask us if it's important, we would say yes. And we rarely take the time to stop and ask our grandparents to tell us stories. We stop long enough to do a little bit of digging ourselves. So can you take a minute just to talk to the younger people who are busy with careers and families, and they like the idea of this, but in practice, they're not really doing anything currently. And I know, like you said, it's important to have those conversations while you still can, right? So how do you balance just the busyness of life, but don't let this slip away? How do you balance that?
That's a really good question. And it's very definitely a factor even in my own life. My kids are probably older than you. One's just turning 40 in a few days, and one is just over 40. And it's hard for them to slow down long enough to hear some of these things. And that's, again, why I keep family things in front of them in my home, because they grow up seeing my grandma's journal. They grow up seeing my grandma's pen in the living room on the shelf. So they're, surrounded by it instead of having it stuffed away in a trunk or something. But I also take advantage of those moments, like I mentioned with my granddaughter, to interject things, make a teachable moment out of anything, just for little snippets of family history.
Mm-hmm.
So my kids and my grandkids get inundated with that whenever, just in casual conversation. I have these heritage albums that I've put together and added to for 20 years. And my kids don't come over here and say, let's look at the album.
Mm-hmm.
But if they come over here and I know they're going to be here, I might have one sitting out. Well, my grandkids will look through them and it pulls their parents in on the conversation. There was a time that one of my granddaughters was looking at the album and just kind of reading the little snippets. Because like I said, some pictures that I have, I just have a paragraph with introducing the person and maybe where they lived or something. And I've learned over the years that I should present the best and file the rest. In other words, I can overwhelm them with pictures if I wanted to.
Yeah.
What I do is I try to put one picture on a page and then pull out the most important stuff so that it's, easy to look at and not get bored by.
Yeah.
As my grandchildren look through this, then they ask their parents questions like, okay, so when was this in relationship to the Civil War? Maybe they're studying Civil War in history.
Yeah.
And where does this person sit in? Where was this person at that time? And that pulls my children in too, which, your age or a little older. So anyway, I think it's just living intentionally in front of your family, the younger generation and even the youngest generations.
Yeah.
And making these things available to them. You can't expect them to have as much time as you would like to be able to sit down and talk to them. But like you said, with your grandfather, you're going to treasure that one day.
Yeah.
And you do now, I'm sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But people don't slow down long enough to do that very often. So I applaud your grandpa for doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah. It is very cool. Okay, one more kind of bigger question, then we'll begin to wrap up here.
Okay.
So no, you're a writer, author, a storyteller, and I think one thing that's just so interesting to me, for some reason, our brains are just wired for stories, right?
Right.
Jesus told stories. He told parables. He taught in a very strategic way.
Right.
And I'm sure you've seen studies and stuff like this, that there's research that if you just say, let me tell you a story, people lean in, right? They all of a sudden, if we just kind of just talk and give data, people start to trail off. But if we say, let me tell you a story, we go back in this time, this happened. Like our brains just switch. Something switches in our mind. We're ready to listen to a story. Why is that? How do you take advantage of that as an author, as a storyteller? How can we take advantage of that? And why do you think stories are so important to us?
Wow. That's a good question. For one thing, it's the relationship, I think. Telling a story builds relationship, but it also is based on relationship. And write a good story that will draw people in and keep people turning the pages, which every writer wants to do, takes making that story relatable.
Yeah.
And so again, I go back to that divorce idea. I made it relatable to my granddaughter because she was going through the same thing and she now knows that her grandpa lived through it.
Yeah.
So that kind of a thing makes it relatable to another generation.
Yeah.
Answer your question.
Yeah. It makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think just framing it in like a narrative just helps our brains wrap around it. It's not just separate data points, but it's a story. And kind of like what you were saying, like if we can wrap our family history into events that are our kids or whoever might, putting our family in frame of reference with the Civil War, frame of reference with a major event, just helps us categorize things, I think, is maybe a good way to say it. Because there's so much data, if we can just kind of put it in something that helps our brain wrap around it a little bit easier.
There's a great exercise that I encourage the participants in my class to do, and it's making a timeline, a person timeline. And it's a super easy thing to do. Start with the year of your birth on the right-hand side. Make a table on your computer with laps across the top and years going down the side. And then you're going to have little tiny spaces because it's got 12 columns. But then you can put DOB, date of birth, and put that in the month you were born. And then maybe you had a grandfather that died when you were 3 years old. Put that DOD grandpa, in that month, and continue doing that. That's something I have done for years. And it solves a lot of family arguments or discussions because I can look at that and say, well, that happened in, it's a great source for that, but it's also a great source for resources to then do your writing too.
Yeah.
And you can also do the same thing for your ancestors. You can take your ancestors' life and make kind of a chart like that of major events in their lifetime if you're getting ready to write a narrative on that grandparent or whoever. And you can incorporate that, mix that, if you will, with a timeline of events in American history.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it kind of, it gets you in that era, which helps you to tell that story.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Elaine, I love what you're doing. I think it's so cool. Thank you for sharing the resources with us. And if people listening now, if some of this has kind of caught their interest, where can we learn more about your books, your workshop? Where can we kind of follow up with you?
Well, I have a website. It's just my name, ElaineMcAllister.com, and it's ElaineMcAllister.com. So you can contact me on that, or you can contact me by email at BFFgrandma,
nice.
BRAMMA @gmail.com. I'd be happy to hear from any of the listeners and happy to provide whatever I can to help them in their journeys.
Awesome. Well, again, Elaine, I think this is such an important topic. I think we all, like you said, we're never done with this, right? There's always more stories to uncover, more we can learn. So thanks for sharing with us, and I hope people listening check out your resources. Thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Plan now to attend USMB Gathering 2024 in Omaha, Nebraska, July 23rd through the 27th, 2024, where our theme is Salt and Light, Faithful Living in a Secular Culture. Our speakers, Greg Hogue, Natasha Crane, Brian Kluth, Don Morris, and the new National Director will help us focus on living unreservedly in the way of Jesus. You will also have a selection of many great workshops and affinity groups. For more information, visit www.usmb.org/USMB-Gathering-2024 or call 1-800-257-0515.
Well, once again, many thanks to Elaine for joining us today. I really enjoyed learning from her, and I hope you did as well. Toward the end there, she mentioned her website, and I do encourage you to check that out, ElaineMcAllister.com. And on there, there's more information about all of her books and some of the workshops that she has coming up. And especially if you live locally in or near Kansas or in the Midwest somewhere, she mentioned that she does these trainings at local libraries. So hey, if this is something you might be interested in, maybe you can mention this to your library and see if you can bring Elaine in to help do a workshop for your community. I'm sure she would love to hear from you if you are interested in that. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. So thanks again so much for listening. And hey, there's just a few weeks left before we head to convention in July. It's going to sneak up before we know it. So if you haven't done that yet, I encourage you to check out the USMB website to check out the convention coming up in Omaha. I will be there, and I look forward to seeing a bunch of you there. So if you haven't signed up yet, do that, and I will love to keep an eye out for you when we get there this summer. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time here on Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.